welcome to the CEC Report for the 13th of February 2015. I'm Elisa Barwick, and joining me today is Robert Barwick. Welcome, Robbie.
Thanks, Elisa.
And on today's show, 3 items. Major discrepancy in TV Sydney siege hostage accounts. Prince Charles's mates exposed in new 9/11 lawsuit. And it's not the 1950s. Greek crisis exposes bankruptcy of world economy. So firstly, major discrepancy in TV Sydney siege hostage accounts. Now last week we had quite a major feature on the fact that the CEC has called for an investigation of ASIO's role in the Sydney siege. And we pointed out that the media reporting of the beginning of the inquest into this matter was misleading. The media actually reported opening statements from that inquest as if they were proven, where in fact that's what the entire inquest will be about, to prove those allegations. Now you had the opportunity to review the Channel 7 and Channel 9 media shows on Sunday night where they interviewed hostages for the first time. And what can you tell us about the discrepancy that was obvious?
Well, the big issue was, which I think everyone will know what I'm talking about, the Thursday of the inquest, the reporting was focusing on the lawyer describing the execution style slaying of Tory Johnson, the manager of Lint Cafe, by Manharon Monis. So this was a big deal because it was a different story than that had been in the media the day after the massacre. Right, which was describing some kind of perhaps a fight over the gun, etc. No, what was laid out at the inquest was a cold-blooded execution, and it's very shocking. Now as we said last week, Elisa, we took issue with the fact that for the hostage accounts that were aired on Sunday, that's already 7 weeks or so after the event. Very strange. They're exclusive paid interviews, which give the TV stations exclusivity. To me, that's a worry because you can tamper. Mediate, tamper, and you can have coaching of the hostages, etc. Because you're on TV. Viewers may not appreciate this. It can be pretty nerve-wracking being on TV, right? We get used to it after a while, but that's what it's like. And so there can be coaching and whatever. But this is now what we are being told as the Australian media, and of course it fits a certain narrative. So what jumped out at me though was that between the 2 accounts on Channel 7 and Channel 9, which by the way, I have to say, I'll digress a little bit, the fact they both put their shows on at the same time on the same night was disgusting. I mean, really was. They're competing for ratings on an issue that frankly should have been on the ABC, to be honest, right? This is not, people shouldn't be making money out of this, but I'm not saying that about the hostages. They deserve everything they get, but I'm talking about just this ratings war over this thing. But there was a very, very major discrepancy that jumped out at me when I watched both accounts. So I'm just going to set it up. It focuses on these last few moments before this execution-style killing, and this is not a minor discrepancy; it's a major discrepancy. You can see. I'm going to play a clip from both shows, one after the other. Where on the 60-minute show, the hostage Louisa, who's the eyewitness to the execution, and then backed up by Selena, who's in the next room, they both describe Monis ordering Tory Johnson to his knees, ordering it. Now, okay, fine, but then on Channel 7, Marsha McHale has a completely different version of that specific event, completely different. So let's just play the clips now.
And then he says to Tory, he says, "You," and he calls him over and says, "Kneel down and put your hands on your head."
But what I heard was him then going back and saying, "Get down on your knees. Get down on your knees."
So he picks her up, he helps her off the ground, he picks her up, and then he notices Tory still sitting on the bench. So he asks Tory to come to him. He goes, "Manager, come over here."
You can see Tory Johnson here. Monis is behind him, his left hand on Tory's shoulder, his right hand holding a shotgun at Tory's back.
He's still a hostage in there with him? You still got a...
He didn't say much to Tory. He just told him to stand next to him. And then after that, he reloaded his gun.
According to Marcia, Monis fumbled to reload his gun for quite some time, and during that time, said not one word.
So Tory wasn't ordered to kneel?
No, there was nothing said. Absolutely nothing. If he kneeled, maybe Man Monis pushed him down, but there was absolutely nothing spoken.
Now, what you have there, Elisa, is why we're saying that the media reporting of the inquest was dead wrong, because they did report it as if it was fact. That's a huge discrepancy people have just seen. Which story is right? I don't know. I'm not casting aspersions on the people telling the story, but it's a big discrepancy. The inquest knows nothing, and I think the lawyer probably has a bit to answer for as well because of the way he read the statement. This has to be investigated, and we are highlighting this so it is highlighted, and in the context that we're calling for an investigation of ASIO from what the information that we publicised, where Mamdouh Habib, someone who's had experience with ASIO, knew that ASIO had been harassing Monis for years, right? And there's all kinds of questions about what ASIO's role was in handling this case. And let me just make 2 points. There was in the Sydney Telegraph on the 10th of February, there was a report how people with SAS experience, are questioning why weren't they called in instead of the police, because they're trained to shoot with double shots, all over, no big messy thing that might have killed the other hostages. Clive Williams from ANU, who's a professor of counter-terrorism, an expert in this, he also questions that, and he questions why there wasn't more negotiation with Monis, which is also a big issue in the TV shows if people watch them. Marcia McHale's observations are quite stunning, right? She feels really abandoned by the way this was handled by the police. That does have to be investigated. And the bigger issue is what happened this week, though, because we're now being told that two 20-year-olds, young men, were going to do an ISIS-style beheading, and it's horrible. It makes you sick to your guts. It's terrifying, but we're taking it on faith. Right? The police apparently didn't even know about this until 20 minutes before they made the arrest. Where did their information come from? We take this on faith. It keeps us coward on our knees as a community, but it keeps more powers going to a secret police apparatus fronted by ASIO, right, that has very little actual accountability to the democratic processes of the country, and that is the only, the most concrete outcome of this type of climate that we're in. More and more of these powers that are stripping us, the rest of us, of our civil liberties, and we can't, if we're afraid, like we're being encouraged to be afraid, we're never going to question it. So we want to question it, and that's why we're highlighting this particular case.
And after the break, we're going to look a little more at some breaks in acknowledging who is really behind international terrorism. Welcome back to the CEC Report. Prince Charles's mates exposed in new 9/11 lawsuit. So before the break, we were talking about an example of what's deemed terrorism in Australia, and now we're going to look at the bigger picture of global terrorism and a window into who is actually behind that, which is the only way you can really begin to stop it.
Yep.
Now, there was a 4,000-page court filing on the 3rd of February in a 9/11 families lawsuit against the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. And the filings that were made for that lawsuit have put unprecedented attention on the Saudi role in the 9/11 attacks. Now, what was tabled, just to lay it out, was firstly testimony by the so-called 20th hijacker, Zacharias Moussaoui. There were affidavits that were tabled from 2 former 9/11 commissioners, and that included John Lehman. He called for the release of the missing 28 pages of the 9/11 Joint Commission report. He also has previously said that the White House has refused to declassify anything having to do with the Saudis because this issue had very special sensitivity, in his words. There was an affidavit from former Senator Bob Kerry, another former 9/11 commissioner. He said that claims by the Saudis that the 9/11 Commission exonerated them are, quote, fundamentally inaccurate and misleading, unquote. And of course, we should release the 28 pages, and we'll see.
And that's an important point. A lot of those Saudi quotes, particularly from Bandar, have been getting around, and people are going, well, they say they've got nothing to hide, and that's Kerry's insight is very important.
We'll put up on the screen an example of one of the 28 redacted pages, which has nothing on it, so you can see, why don't they just release it if they're supposedly vindicated here. There was an affidavit by former Senate Intelligence Commission Chairman Bob Graham, and he said he is convinced there is a direct line between some of the 9/11 terrorists and the government of Saudi Arabia. Further filings provided detailed evidence of how Saudi-sponsored charities, quote-unquote charities, financed al-Qaeda in the years leading up to 9/11, including the role of the new king of Saudi Arabia, King Salman. And another extensive filing said that the 9/11 attack, quote, was made possible by the lavish sponsorship al-Qaeda received from its material sponsors, including the kingdom, unquote. Now, regarding Moussaoui, the so-called 20th hijacker, who wasn't one of the hijackers ultimately, there were 100 pages of sworn testimony which dominated the media coverage, including very prominent front page coverage in the New York Times and major TV coverage, for example, on CNN, and also was the main subject of a media release that we put out on the 11th of February. Now, can you talk a bit about what Moussaoui revealed and the connections also between what he revealed and Prince Charles?
Okay, well, the important thing is he showed that while it's known that charities in Saudi Arabia that are under the control of these Wahhabist clerics were funneling money to al-Qaeda, his claims show that the royals themselves, and this is the part, this proves the lie that's been given all these years, where the Western authorities will say, oh yeah, no, we know there's bad stuff happening in Saudi Arabia on the ground, but that's different to the government, right? That's the claim. It's these charities, it's not the government. He shows that he was wined and dined and was able to meet people as high up as the man who has just become the king, King Salman. But most importantly, he named 3 figures as the key royals involved in directing these charities to give this money to al-Qaeda. They are 2 of Prince Charles's closest friends, Prince Bandar bin Sultan and Prince Turki bin Faisal. The third one, and I won't spend too much time on this, is Prince Al-Walid, who until last year was the second largest shareholder in News Corporation and a strategic ally in that shareholding of Rupert Murdoch. It's the reason here's the reason that Rupert Murdoch, with a minority stake, has been able to control the overall News Corporation worldwide, because he's been in an alliance with this Prince Al-Walid. Well, Murdoch's News Corporation, of course, they are the cheerleaders of the so-called war on terror. It's his papers that were responsible for the Iraq war, because there were so many holes in the story at the time. The people like Blair and Bush and Cheney would not have gotten away with it if the Murdoch press hadn't have campaigned for it, right? So this is more than ironic that here's Murdoch in alliance with one of the guys named to be now one of the major sponsors of terrorism. But back onto the main point, the other 2, Prince Bandar and Prince Turki, like I said, Prince Charles's closest friends. They were when Charles married Camilla, he only invited 8 royals, because it was a rather intimate little arrangement.
Foreign royals.
8 foreign royals to the wedding. 2 of them were these 2, right? That's how close he is to them. They're long-time top officials of Saudi intelligence. They both are involved in sponsoring this Prince Charles's Oxford Centre for Islamic Studies that operates out of Oxford, and they poured millions of dollars into that. And it's that centre, as we exposed in this newspaper here, in our story on Charles of Arabia, that centre hosts these guys who are some of the most radical clerics in the world calling for jihad.
And also boasts a chair endowed by Mohammed bin Laden, who's the father of Osama bin Laden, and that family donated millions of dollars.
Oh, absolutely.
So Charles, and this is interesting because Charles just came out during the week lamenting the radicalisation of Islamic youth in the United Kingdom. And this is the height of hypocrisy, because he blames it on the internet and a youthful search for adventure and so forth, rather than his promotion of it through his Oxford Centre and through his friends.
And through his friends, this is a direct. Everyone who knows about this radicalisation in the UK, Elisa, knows that the headquarters of it is this place called the Finsbury Park Mosque, and these two, especially Prince Turki, are actually directly connected to that Finsbury Park Mosque. So it's not just Oxford and academia. It's this on the ground, radicals factory that operates out of London.
And you can read the press release for more detail on that. But I also wanted to raise the fact that Charles has also been reported in recent weeks saying that he no longer wants to be involved in what is perceived as him arranging arms deals with Saudi Arabia.
Well, here's the reason that Britain has an arms relationship with Saudi Arabia. The Saudi royals are such close friends of Charles that when the government, on behalf of BAE Systems, wants to sell arms to the Saudis, Charles goes and negotiates the deals because they respect him so much. Anyway, and this is in response to this new book that's come out called Charles, the Heart of a King, where the author, Catherine Mayer, claimed that Charles said he doesn't want to do this anymore. But right in the centre of that book, she actually showed that a lot of this is PR in reaction to pressure that we, the CEC and the LaRouche movement and Executive Intelligence Review have created, because an example that she gave of the kind of bad press he's been getting for it was EIR's article, Charles of Arabia, that from earlier this last year, that we is the source for this feature in our New Citizen.
Exactly. So this is very good progress. Now, we'll stop there for a moment, and after the break, we're going to talk about what the latest crisis in Greece reveals about the state of the global economy. Welcome back to the CEC Report. It's not the 1950s. What the case of Greece betrays about the new GFC. Now, by way of background, what's happening in Greece at the moment is they, of course, are demanding that their debt be written down because it is unpayable. Now, of course, they've had a big fat no from the European Central Bank and all the other authorities, the IMF, the ECB, which makes up the Troika. But at the same time, the ECB in particular is putting Greece in a complete straitjacket. So firstly, the ECB has stopped accepting Greek bonds as collateral, so Greece can no longer borrow from the ECB in that way.
Which itself, Elisa, is an acknowledgement by the ECB. If they're not going to accept them as collateral, they're actually acknowledging that that debt's unpayable, which is what the Greek argument is.
Now, there is another borrowing facility they can use through the ECB, but it's very limited. It's for a week-long borrowing only. It's very high interest and it's limited to something like $10 billion.
It's the equivalent of a payday loan scam that happens everywhere now.
And if it's defaulted on, it goes onto the debt of Greece, not the ECB. The ECB has also decided they will not allow Greece to increase government treasury bill issuances, so they can't raise funds by issuing treasury bills. And of course, the Prime Minister of Greece, Alexis Tsipras, has refused an extension of the bailout, which expires at the end of February, for good reason, because he said that's just an extension of mistakes and disaster that led us to this point. So he has said he'll instead seek bridging loans from its creditors until agreements on debts can be reached with them. And he said, look, we're not negotiating our national sovereignty. The Greek people gave us a strong and clear mandate to immediately end austerity and change policies. Therefore, the bailout was first cancelled by its very own failure and its destructive results. Now, what the Greeks and others in Europe have referred to is the precedent, though, to write down the debts of the 1953 London Debt Conference. And that was done in 1953 to Germany's debt. So the question is, why can't it be done now? What it did to Germany's debt was it wrote off 62% of the debt, and it also ruled that any further payment of the remaining debt could not amount to more than 5% of the country's export earnings in any given year.
Which meant they only had to pay it when they could afford it.
Exactly. So together then with the creation, which was the key of new credit institutions and reconstruction projects, this is why Germany became an economic powerhouse of Europe. But Robbie, why can't they do this today? Why are they refusing to do it?
Because the difference is the actual economy today is fundamentally bankrupt, as opposed to straight after World War II, we had the global economy was a powerhouse industrial economy, especially places like the United States and things were happening in Europe, but they were really industrial economies, right? Real wealth. It was based on industrial jobs, high wages, and not on airy-fairy economics, financial speculation and gambling like it is now. So because the nature of the economy is different because of all these free marketeers for the last 40 years who told us that this was the way of the future, right? We don't need those jobs anymore. They can all go to China and we'll just play around with money. We'll fiddle with money in a casino because we are in a casino economy, and the bad betting debts have piled up. They cannot let Greece's debt and a forgiveness of Greece's debt be the fuse that lights a meltdown.
Yeah, any write-off even of a small amount could blow the entire derivatives bubble in particular.
Oh, because there was such a scam to get countries like Greece into the EU, which they wanted them in the 90s. There was such a scam to fix the books so that Greece could qualify, and Germany approved of it, and all the other countries that are being hard bastards on Greece now, they all approved. They were happy for this to happen behind the scenes, which nudge, nudge, wink, wink. So there's so much in the way of derivatives tied up in this that they're afraid that it will be a meltdown in this enormous speculative derivatives bubble. And the other point that makes a difference though between then and now, back then the United States had Glass-Steagall, Japan had Glass-Steagall, but even Europe had its own financial regulations that meant that if you did have a crisis situation where a whole chunk of the financial system had to be written off, there'd be no blowback on the real economy, on people's bank accounts, on their housing loans or anything like that,
because
right?
Glass-Steagall meant that any bank that traded in derivatives could not hold deposits.
Exactly. So we don't have Glass-Steagall now, and they know that if a meltdown happens, it will just rush through everything like a grass fire.
And there's actually been a lot of support across Europe for this, from Italy, from Spain. The Irish Dale actually put up a motion for a debt conference, which was defeated. But the push has continued with Sinn Féin, which is quite close to Tsipras's party in Greece.
Well, Sinn Féin were the only party properly in Ireland to oppose the austerity in Ireland.
And they've even brought it up in the European Parliament as well. But there's also been a warning from the president of China's Daedong Global Credit Rating Agency, Guan Zhazhong, who said on the 4th of February that we will, quote, face a new world financial crisis in the next few years. And he went on to say that it would be worse than 2008. He said this crisis began in the EU countries and the United States, but, quote, was transmitted to the entire world through the policy of quantitative easing and the use of the printing press. All the countries had to pay for that.
Yep.
And in fact, we're clearly paying for it now. I mean, you've just had Treasury Secretary John Fraser and the Reserve Bank Governor Glenn Stevens addressing Cabinet on this issue of the fact that we're running up $110 million per day to pay the bills, to fund the budget deficit and interest on debt.
Now, Lisa, that figure is not a problem in and of itself. It's only a problem because we don't have a productive economy, and the money we're borrowing is not being put into productive things that can generate jobs and the ability to pay it back. That's what makes it a problem. It's not a problem for the size of our economy. They're citing that so they can, as the excuse for us to eat the same austerity that the Greeks have just rejected, right?
Exactly.
It's nuts. Greece is an example. Austerity shrinks your economy and destroys people. Throw it out.
And that's what Fraser and Stevens were saying. We need to have structural reform, etc. What we need instead, in actuality, is for Australia to go along the pathway of the BRICS. And we're calling on everybody this week to call in and order bulk copies of this and get it out to everybody you know, because that message has to get to our parliamentarians.
It covers the economy, it covers the terrorism issue, it covers everything relevant right now. We need to order bulk copies and distribute them.
Yep, all over the place. So thanks for tuning in, and join us again next week for the CEC Report.